Hi, I'm Nikon Ambassador Kristi Odom. After a few amazing days in Yellowstone National Park, we are inside where it's nice and warm. I've got my tea, I've got my blanket, I've got my computer, and I'm ready to do some editing. I'm going to show you guys how I edit 4 of the images from the last couple of days that have different styles and a different way of editing. So I'm excited to show you guys my full process. I'm going to be editing the images on my Asus ZenBook Pro Duo, and I do all my editing for the most part. Actually, I do like 95% of my editing in Adobe Lightroom. So I'm going to be using Adobe Lightroom Classic today, and I'm going to show you guys how I get those images ready to be posted on social media and to get hopefully printed. I've got 4 files now in Adobe Lightroom Classic, and I'm ready to start editing. One of the first I'm going to edit is when that morning light hit this elk in the face and I got to see a little bit of that light in its eyes. I shot this with my Nikon Z9, so it's a 45.7 megapixel file, which lets me zoom in and see so much detail that I wasn't able to even see when I was out there, from the textures to the horn to the light in the eye. Absolutely beautiful file. Looking at this image, there are a couple of things that bother me. And one of the first things that I do is I play with my crop. On this image, the whole right-hand side of the image doesn't add to the narrative. It doesn't add. There's a lot of wasted space here, but I do love what's going on here. When you go into the crop tool, one of the things that I do love is I do love a square crop. So I'm going to go over here to original, hit 1 by 1, and see if a square crop fits this better. To me, I think this is a great crop. I love the shape that comes out, not only the square shape here, but the triangular shape in the elk's horns, the elk's neck, and then back up. It's got great eye movement there. Triangle is being such a hard shape, having a triangular composition can really help bring out power and intensity. So this is a bit of the crop that I want, but I might go just a little bit tighter, to be honest, because I don't like how you see just a tiny bit of those legs. So I may just crop that a little bit there, and that's the crop that I like. Now that I've got my crop, I've got my triangular shape, I'm going to work on adding just a touch of contrast. So I'm going to add that in. I'm really big on looking to see where your eyes go in an image. And right now my eyes go to this really bright spot here because it is so much brighter than the rest of the image. I'm going to fix that by using the masking tool. And in the masking tool, I'm going to use the brush tool. And you can make your brush bigger and smaller by your left or right brackets here. And I'm going to brush this area that's pulling my eye just a little bit too much. I'm going to take that and I'm going to take those highlights and pull them down just a little bit, and also pull that exposure down just a little bit. So now this still keeps the texture. I still have my tones in there, but it doesn't pull my eye as much. I'm going to add another masking layer because I want people to notice the elk's eyes even more. And I'm going to do that by using this radial gradient right here. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to make a radial gradient right around the elk's eye. One of my favorite things is to add just a tiny bit of clarity at the spot that I want somebody's eyes to go to, because we tend to gravitate towards sharp areas of the image as well as contrasty areas of the image. So I'm going to take the clarity, I'm going to increase it up to about 20, and I might pop my exposure around that eye area just a little bit to the right as well. And I'm going to pull my blacks back just a touch because sometimes the exposure will lose the blacks. I'm going to show you guys a before and after so you can see what that dodging and burning and the radial gradient has done to this image. So that's before and that's after. Do you see how the eye's popping just a little bit more, as well as that distracting element in the shoulder has been toned down a bit so it doesn't pull your eye as much? This, I like the color, I like the tones, I like the contrast. I think this is looking pretty good. I am a huge fan of a little tiny vignette, Gonna add just a little bit. So you go down to the effects tab and you pull just, you see that's what a vignette looks like, but you don't want a vignette that you can see at all. So I'm just gonna pull it to -9. Just a little bit of darkness around the edge to keep your eye engaged in this frame. So this would be my final output. Once again, I'm gonna show you the before the edit and then the after. There's so much that we can do with just simple dodging and burning and adding a little bit of clarity in certain areas. And I like to keep my images as simple as possible to keep my image as true to what I'm seeing in wildlife as possible. So this would be my final edit for this image. So here is the image that I'm going to edit next. Now I'm looking again for those distracting elements. Where is my eye going in this image? My eye is going to this black area at the bottom with the snow on top, which is distracting me from the main subject, which is the wolf howling. All right, first thing I'm gonna do, I always start with the crop. I am gonna keep the crop proportions unlocked, the crop aspect ratio uncropped, because I want to just kind of play around with a crop that fits the image instead of trying to fit it inside a specific ratio. So I'm going to pull this up and get rid of that distracting element of the ground. I'm also going to take this straighten tool. I want this line to be straight right here. So I put the straighten tool on one part, I click, I drag this line to another, and that straightens this line in the frame. Really great tool for straightening out a horizon. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this up. I kind of want this wolf over in this third area, maybe a little bit less, so it's gonna be a bit of a panoramic shot. You can toggle your overlay modes by hitting the O button. And you can kind of see these quadrants. You can see where thirds hit. You can kind of figure out how you want to lay things out by overlaying this. And maybe I want the wolf just a little bit more on the third line. All right, I'm just gonna fidget just a little bit and go, yeah. All right. So this to me is the crop that I want. Now I'm gonna play with bringing in this as more of a graphic image. On the masking tool, actually, I'm just gonna go ahead and I'll show you guys that later. I'm gonna go ahead and pull my blacks in and get some more detail. I'm also gonna bring my shadows a little bit richer. Do you see how the silhouette of the wolf is coming out even more? To me, the color doesn't add anything to this image, and so I'm actually like really obsessed with black and whites. But you've got just a little bit of browns in here. I would prefer this to be a true black and white, so I'm gonna just pull my saturation out. And I do a lot by looking at my histograms here, and if you look at this histogram, you don't have much detail in this shadow area, and you don't have much detail in the white. This is, to me, a muddy image, and muddy images aren't very pleasing to the eye. That's where things kind of hang in the center of the histogram a little too much. So I want to richen up my shadows, and I want to bring in some detail in those highlights. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that by pulling my shadows to the left and my blacks a little bit to the left more. If you look at the histogram, you can see how all of a sudden there's more detail now in the shadows. And if I pull my highlights to the right, and you can do that as well by dragging and dropping on here, and I'm pull my whites. So you see how it's becoming a lot more contrasty and a lot more graphic. So I'd probably play around in this area a bit. And yeah, here's the before the edit, and here's the after. A lot more graphic, a lot more punchy detail, and that shape really comes out as well as the vegetation and the landscape at Yellowstone. All right, one of my favorite shots from the whole trip is of the iconic bison. Waited for a long time. Guide helped me get in to get a tight shot, but yet still maintain a safe distance to make sure I didn't disturb. I waited for this bison to lift its head. It was digging through the snow to get the vegetation underneath. So right when I look at this image, I wanted a tight shot because I didn't want the stark contrast of the body of the bison against the white snow, because that would pull your eye way too much. And I really wanted people to see what I was seeing, which is this beautiful eye, the shape here in the chin, and the shape that's reflected in the horn. It's this beautiful repetition of shapes. When I look at this image, there's a couple of things that are drawing my eye. One being the grass in the bison's mouth, and also this light corner over here. So I'm gonna start again. I always start with that crop, and I'm just gonna crop that down. I don't wanna, yeah, just a little bit. I'm also gonna crop that corner a little bit. Now all of a sudden my eye isn't getting as trapped down here. Yes, my eye is going down here, but I'm gonna fix that a little bit more with my dodging and burning. We're gonna focus on the contrast that this needs. I'm gonna go ahead and bump my contrast. I'm always keeping an eye on my histogram to make sure, see if I go too far with this contrast, you'll see it way too left on the histogram up here, all right? And if I go too far with my blacks, you'll start, when you mouse over this arrow, it'll show you what areas have lost detail. So I wanna make sure I never do that, right? Okay. So I've added some contrast, and I'm just looking mainly at this area here. There we go. I think that looks pretty good for contrast. Gosh, look at the detail. You can see the individual eyelashes as well as the snow in the reflection. You can see individual snowflakes. How cool. I'm so excited. This was on DX mode as well, so it's only a 20 megapixel file for my Z9, but pretty excited to get so many rich details in the photo. Look at all the hairs. Beautiful. Anyways, I'm going to go down and I am going to play a little bit with a vignette, which will darken around the edges because I find this area, and this area to be way too bright. So I'm going to darken it just a little bit. That looks much better. And this area to me is still too bright, so I'm going to use this masking tool again. And I'm going to add a paintbrush, and I'm going to just brush the very bottom of the nose here. I'm also going to brush this corner. And I'm going to take the exposure down just a little bit in those areas. I don't want it to go to black. I'm keeping an eye on my histogram. But now all of a sudden there's not these bright spots that are pulling my eye down here. I'm going to add another mask, and I'm going to use, once again, that radial gradient button. And I'm going to add this. You click and you stretch. I'm going to add this around the eyeball because I love this area. I'm going to play with this gradient just a bit, and now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add just a little bit of clarity, which makes that eye really, really sharp. I'm going to add just a little bit of exposure because our eyes are drawn to lighter areas of the frame. And now all of a sudden, this eye is starting to pop. Do you guys see that? I'm going to warm up the image just a touch because it's got a little bit too much blue for me. We warm it up by moving that temperature dial to the right. There we go. Love those warm tones. I'm going to show you the before the edit. And do you see how it's kind of not as punchy and vibrant, and your eye goes kind of to the bottom of the frame and all over, but now it's got that punch to it. You see the beautiful eye, you see the horn, you see the repetition of shapes. And gosh, look at how beautiful that eye is. It's great that we can lead our viewer right there. So simple, dodging, burning, a little added clarity, and then I have my final image that's ready to go. Now I get to show you one of my favorites that I got to play with, which is, this was an in-camera multiple exposure. This is a JPEG file because the Nikon Z9, when it does multiple exposure, it keeps the RAW files, but the final multiple exposure is a JPEG. So I'm editing off a JPEG here, which means it might not have that dynamic range and the depth to it. But at the same time, I'm really happy to have been able to get a multiple exposure. And I have these two files as well in RAW form. So if I wanted to create this in post, I could use the RAW files and create it in Photoshop or something like that. But this is the straight out of camera JPEG. And to me, one of the things that I've mentioned in composition is I'm always looking for that spiral. I'm always looking for that Fibonacci spiral. And I'm going to show you guys here, if you go to this crop overlay tool, you can toggle your crops with that O key, right? So I toggled to a spiral. This one's a little bit elongated. So if I hit Shift and O, it'll toggle all of the spirals. And there you see your golden spiral, Fibonacci spiral. And if you look at this image, it has quite a few spirals in it. I'm going to go ahead and hit lock on the ratio just so that you guys can see. See the lines that go up and go down here? But then if I toggle as well, the Fibonacci spiral that goes from this body down and around, there's Fibonacci spirals all throughout this image. And that's one of the reasons I composed it like this. And that's one of the things that makes me really excited. I actually don't want to crop this. I just wanted to show you guys the Fibonacci spiral overlay, which sometimes I even dodge and burn along that overlay. So I'll put it up there, I'll have a look, and then I dodge and burn. I'll like burn around the outside edges and then do a little dodging in the middle to help guide people's eyes throughout. This can be used in so many ways to help improve your images. All right, this one I actually like the in-camera crop though. Might just tighten it just a touch. I want this one to keep its proportions, so I'm gonna lock the aspect ratio there. I'm gonna pull this in here, this in there. I think that looks great. One of the things about multiple exposures, this is on multiple exposure mode average, which averages the two images exposures when it overlays them. And so sometimes you get a little bit of a ghost feel, and I want to bring back the punch that was there in the original images. I have to do that a lot by adjusting my contrast. So I'm going to take that contrast and drag it to the right, as well as adjusting the blacks of the image. So I'm going to take the blacks and move it to the left. Do you see how I'm getting more information and stronger images just by, or stronger contrast here? And how that's helping bring that muted image that the multiple exposure made. It's helping it look more true to form. So I'm going to play a little bit more. Ooh, there we go. Just play with these two blacks in contrast. All right, and then this one as well, it went a little bit warm for me, so I might take the temperature back to the left just a hair. And then I would probably go down and play a little bit with a vignette because I feel like the edges of this image are guiding your eye off. I would love for people's eyes to be trapped a little bit more in the detail in the center. Once again, I can do my masking tool around the eyes. I'm going to do this one with a brush because I want to include both of their eyes. I'm making that brush tool a little smaller with my left bracket key. I'm going to paint over this eye and I'm going to paint over that eye. I'm going to add those blacks a little bit stronger, and I'm going to take the clarity just a little bit as well as the exposure a little to the left. There we go. Okay, I'm going to show you the before and after edit. So this is the before the edit, and this is the after. And a couple of the questions that I get about editing is how much do I feel comfortable cropping, and also how far will I take an image. I like to keep my image as true to the scene as possible. I do love a square crop, which does crop quite a bit out of the image sometimes, and sometimes I will crop down just a little bit, but I try to edit in a way that I know that the image would print really well. And so if you crop too much, I don't like putting things on my Instagram that wouldn't print. So a lot of times I'm only cropping down 10 to 20% off the edges, but that's where I like to kind of keep it. With the editing, the thing about wildlife photography is we want to stay as true to the subject as we can. So any sort of like adding extra saturation or, punching the image too much, in a way you're getting away from the real and you're going into the surreal, which, it might be your style, and as long as you stay up front with that. But for me, I want to honor the wildlife because it is beautiful how it is in its natural form. So I try to keep things as simple as possible. I'm very inspired by Ansel Adams and other darkroom masters. I used to be a darkroom manager, so I try to keep things to dodging and burning and things that I could do back in the darkroom days. And even with multiple exposures, I used to do multiple exposures in camera by not advancing the film. So I would do my own in-camera multiple exposures. So I try to keep my art in a way true to what I could do in a darkroom. So that's a little bit about my edit. We're going to talk just a second about the export settings that I use. I use different export settings. I always keep things in the same folder as the original folder. And then I have subfolders. My subfolder S edit is for my small edits, But I do like keeping a clean edit that is not a small edit, that keeps everything as it is. It does not resize the image. It keeps the resolution at 300, and it keeps, let me scroll up, it keeps the quality all the way at 100 at JPEG. So I like to keep things, and that's when they go into the edit folder. Now, if I'm prepping something for social media, like say this image here of the elk is ready to go on my Instagram, I do my export. The short key for export on a Windows machine is Control-Shift-E, or you can just hit export, and I think it's Open Apple Shift-E on a Mac. I'm not sure about that. But if I wanted to do something for Instagram, I like to put it in a folder called S-Edit. And for Instagram, a lot of times I'm resizing my long edge to 2000. Now 2000 pixels across, it changes all the time. Sometimes I have to go and see what the optimal size for web sharing is, but 2000 is usually a pretty good place to start. 72 pixels per inch is a good screen resolution, and since this image is only 4 screens, I'm going to do that at 72 pixels per inch. I'm going to keep my image format as JPEG, my quality to 100, and I'm going to do my export. Now, sometimes if I am prepping an image for competition or to do real fine editing, I'll export the image as a TIFF, and I'll put that in a folder called Large Edit. And Large Edit, the reason that I would use a TIFF over a JPEG is because a TIFF is a non-compressed file. Every time you save a JPEG, you're compressing it in a different way and you lose information. So a TIFF can keep that file really large. You can have your 16 bits of depth, and you can make sure there's absolutely no compression. I would not resize this, but keep it at the 300 pixels per inch. And so this would be something that I was prepping for print or prepping for competition or prepping for whatever I might need a large file for. Everything's a little bit different, and yes, I do sharpen images, but I sharpen them as a very last tool when I know what I'm going to do with the image, and I usually do my sharpening in Photoshop because an image that's sharpened for web needs to be sharpened totally different than an image that's sharpened for print. And sharpening for print is very different as well, depending on what paper surface and what print size you're using. So I never sharpen until it's a very last step, and I keep an unsharpened version in those folders. But look, guys, look at how much detail there is. Quite beautiful, right? My goodness, I can't wait to get these on my wall, and I'm really excited to show you guys more on my social in the upcoming weeks. Thank you for joining me on this amazing adventure. Giant thank you to B&H for putting together this amazing trip out to Yellowstone National Park. It's been an honor to be part of your wildlife series. I hope you all have learned something from the composition tips, the camera tips, cold weather tips, all of the above, but first and foremost, remember the ethics and remember the importance of doing your research and hiring a guide and somebody that can help you understand the wildlife you're photographing. Our planet is so beautiful, and I'm so grateful to have the tools, to have my Nikon to be able to capture these moments, to be able to have my editing tools like my Asus ZenBook that I can use to be a creator on the go and share these images. And I'm really grateful for all of you guys and all the time that you've given me through this series. I would love to see your own passions and your own artwork. Feel free to follow along on social. It's at Kristi Odom. Sign up for my newsletter on my website, which is kristiodom.com. And feel free to share your images. Hashtag B&H Photo. And we would love to see what you've learned from these tips in this time that we've spent together in Yellowstone National Park. Giant thank you. Have a great rest of your day.